"Please don't take my mama," they cried, not knowing the cowboy was her long-lost husband. Arizona Territory, 1876, where the wind carried the scent of gunpowder, and justice rode alone. The wagon rocked violently across the hard-packed trail, wheels screeching, chased by thunderous hooves. Shots rang out behind it, sharp, cruel cracks that split the silence of the desert dusk. Lillian Grace gritted her teeth as she whipped the reins, one arm locked tightly around her 6-year-old son, Jesse. "Hold on, baby," she breathed, her voice shaking. "Mama, they're coming," Jesse cried, his small hands clinging to her dress. Behind them, 3 riders in dust-backed coats closed in, Granger men, bandits, killers. One leveled a rifle. "Get down!" Lillian shouted, just as the wagon jolted, a front wheel hitting a buried rock. Wood split with a sickening crack. The wagon tipped, throwing them forward. Lillian twisted mid-air, shielding Jesse with her body as they hit the sand, hard. Pain flared through her shoulder, but she did not let go of the boy. "Run," she hissed, shoving Jesse toward a rocky outcrop. "Go!" The boy scrambled behind the stones, panting, trembling. Lillian turned, blood on her lip, dress torn, eyes blazing. She drew a small pistol from beneath her skirt, old but loaded. Her hands were steady. One of the riders dismounted, grinning as he approached. "You got fire, lady, but that boy's coming with us." "You'll have to kill me first," she said. He cocked his head. "Maybe I will." The hammer clicked back on his revolver. And then, a gunshot. Not hers. The outlaw jerked forward, a hole blossoming through his chest. He collapsed. 2 more shots cracked like thunder. The second rider slumped off his horse. The third turned, spurred his mount, and vanished into the growing night. A man rode through the dust behind him, rifle still warm in his hands. Long duster coat, hat low over his brow, he moved with deadly calm. Ethan Kane. He dismounted in a single, fluid motion, walking toward Lillian and the boy. His boots crunched softly against the sand. Lillian rose, gun still in hand but lowered. Her breath was ragged, her mind spinning. Jesse peeked from behind the rocks, wide-eyed. As the stranger approached, Jesse rushed forward, arms spread, eyes wet with fear. "Please don't take our mama," he shouted, standing between the man and Lillian. The words struck like a bullet to the heart. Ethan stopped cold. His gaze dropped to the child, mud-streaked cheeks, trembling lip, fierce little eyes. And something inside him shattered. The boy's face. Those eyes. His eyes. Ethan stared, stunned, as if time itself had frozen. His own memories surged forward. Lillian in springtime sun, laughing, the whisper of her dress, the day she said yes, the tiny wooden crib they built, the fire. God, the fire. He looked past Jesse and saw her. Lillian. Her face was pale, dirty, streaked with blood, but it was her, the same soft jawline, the eyes that once held him like no bullet ever could. He had not seen that face in 7 years. Not since the night their home burned and he clawed through the ashes, screaming her name. "Lillian," he said hoarsely. She flinched, as if the name itself carried weight, her pistol lowered all the way now, forgotten at her side. She stared at him. "Ethan?" He nodded, barely able to breathe. Jesse turned, confused. "Mama? Who is he?" Lillian stepped forward, pulling Jesse gently to her side. Her voice trembled. He's no one, sweetheart. Just a man who helped us." Ethan's jaw clenched. The pain behind his eyes burned. He noticed something, a glint at the boy's chest. A small silver pendant dangled on a chain, shaped like an E. It stopped him cold. His eyes met hers again. That was mine. She said nothing. Wind swept the desert floor, stirring sand like ghosts through the ruins of memory. Ethan swallowed hard. We need to get the boy out of this sun. Lillian hesitated, then gave a slight nod. He turned to his horse. There's a garrison outpost up the ridge, still standing last I saw. I'll take you both. Lillian hesitated. Her grip on Jesse tightened. But after a moment she followed. And behind them, the fading sun bathed the desert red, as if the land itself remembered blood. The outpost rose from the desert like a broken tooth. A relic of war and abandonment, it stood just enough to offer shelter to those with nowhere else to run. Ethan pushed open the door with the butt of his rifle. Hinges groaned, the room inside cloaked in dust and cold shadow. He stepped in first, checked the corners, then turned to signal. Lillian followed, cradling Jesse tightly against her chest. The boy's skin burned with fever. His face, once alert, now drifted in and out of a restless daze. Ethan knelt by a collapsed cot, brushed off dirt and splinters, and spread his coat over it. "Lay him here," he said. Lillian hesitated, then complied. Her movements were careful but quick. "He needs water," she said, eyes darting around the room. Ethan handed her his canteen. She poured a bit into Jesse's mouth, but the boy coughed and whimpered, sweat beading at his temple. "I can get a wet cloth," Ethan murmured. He found a strip of burlap from an old sack, tore it clean and soaked it in water. Kneeling beside the boy, he pressed it gently to his forehead. Lillian stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her back rigid. "He will be all right," Ethan said, not looking up. "It's mostly fear and heat." She said nothing. Ethan looked over his shoulder. "You do not have to stand over there like I'm some outlaw, Lillian." "I do not know who you are anymore," she replied, voice low. "I buried you," he said. Silence. Ethan returned to Jesse's side. The boy stirred, murmuring something incoherent, then sank back into sleep. Ethan stared at the child a moment longer, then stood and walked to the opposite wall. He stared into the cracked timber like it might explain everything. "I came home late that night," he began, voice distant. "They had already come and gone. The house was in flames. I ran inside anyway, got thrown back by the blast from the cellar." He exhaled sharply. "When I woke, the house was ash. They found cloth, said it was yours, said no one could have survived." Lillian's lips parted, eyes glossy in the dim light. But she said nothing. "I spent a year hunting them," Ethan went on. "Every man with the Granger mark, shot most, hanged too, but I never found you." Her voice cracked. "Because I was not in that house." He turned slowly. "Then, where were you?" Lillian's hands trembled slightly. "Running." "From who?" "From everyone." She stepped toward Jesse, knelt beside him, adjusted the cloth on his forehead. "After the fire," she said, "I tried to go back. I needed help. But the townspeople—" her voice faltered. "They thought I led the Grangers there, that I was the reason they came." "That's insane," Ethan said. "They did not care," she whispered. "They saw me alive and you gone. They called me a traitor, a liar. One woman threw stones. A man tried to drag me out by my hair." Ethan's fists clenched. "I had no choice," she said. "I ran south, to the border towns, changed my name." He stared at her, hollow. "And the boy?" he asked. Lillian did not lift her head. She stroked Jesse's hair gently. "He's just a child," she said softly. "That's all that matters." "I deserve to know," Ethan said, stepping forward. Lillian rose to her feet and met his eyes for one brief moment, and then looked away. "I cannot talk about this now," she said. Ethan studied her in silence, then looked back at the child. The fever still clung to him. So small, so familiar. Without another word, Ethan sat near the door, rifle resting across his knees. Lillian returned to Jesse's side, her body a wall between Ethan and the boy. The night stretched long, and for the first time in 7 years, Ethan Kane was not sure if what haunted him had died in the flames or had just begun again. Morning crept in through broken beams, painting streaks of pale gold across the outpost floor. The night's fever had broken, but the air remained heavy, as if memory itself refused to lift. Jesse stirred first. His eyes fluttered open, then squinted at the beams above. "You made it," Ethan murmured from where he sat by the door. The boy blinked, confused, then slowly smiled. "You're still here." "I said I would be," Ethan replied. Lillian, curled beside Jesse on the floor, stirred. She looked up, saw Ethan, and stiffened, but Jesse sat up too quickly to notice. "Are you a cowboy?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Ethan chuckled. "Something like that." Jesse grinned. "Can I call you Cowboy Man?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sure, kid." By noon the sun had grown hotter. The roof above the sleeping quarters sagged dangerously. Ethan stood on a crate, hammering loose planks back into place. The repairs were simple, but necessary. Inside, Jesse played near the hearth, dragging a worn-out stuffed horse behind him by one ear. "That thing's seen better days," Ethan noted, hopping down. Jesse held it up. One leg hung by a thread. "Mama tried to fix it, but it keeps breaking. Let me try." Ethan sat beside the boy, pulled a needle from his bag, and began stitching the fabric carefully. Lillian watched from the far corner, silent. When he was done, he handed the patched horse back to Jesse. "They're good as new." Jesse beamed. "Thanks, Cowboy Man." Later that afternoon, while Ethan stacked kindling, Jesse sat at the small wooden table, tongue between his lips, focused on a drawing. Lillian glanced at it, then froze. On the paper, a child's version of a family. A woman with long hair, a boy with the patched horse, and next to them, a tall man in a wide hat, holding both their hands. Jesse looked up proudly. "It's us." Ethan stepped over. "You're quite the artist." "Do you like it?" Jesse asked. Ethan paused. "Very much." Lillian reached over, turned the drawing face down. But Ethan had already seen. That night, as the wind howled beyond the walls, Ethan sat sharpening his knife. Jesse lay asleep in the corner, curled in his blanket. The dim lantern cast long shadows on the wooden floor. Lillian stood by the broken window, arms wrapped around herself. "He's a good boy," Ethan said. She nodded. "He's got your smile." Lillian didn't turn. "He's wearing something," Ethan continued. "Something I remember." Her shoulders stiffened. Ethan stood slowly, walked over to where Jesse slept. He knelt and gently lifted the edge of the boy's shirt. The silver chain caught the lantern light. The small E pendant rested just above the boy's heart. He picked it up, ran his thumb over the engraving. "You kept this," he said softly. Lillian turned. "I couldn't throw it away. It was my wedding gift to you." She nodded once. Ethan let the pendant fall back against the boy's chest and stood. "You told me I was dead," he said. "But you were the one who vanished." "I didn't vanish," she said quietly. "I ran. I survived." "You were pregnant, Lillian." His voice was sharp now. "You carried that boy inside you and never once tried to find me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you were gone, Ethan. I saw the house burning. I ran for the woods and didn't stop running. When I came back, they said you were dead. And when I tried to grieve, they called me a traitor." He stepped closer. "You could have sent word. You could have told someone. I was hunted, she snapped. By men who thought I'd sold them out, by neighbors who spat on me. I had no home, no name, only him. He looked at Jesse, sleeping soundly, unaware of the storm around him. He was all I had left, she whispered. I did not want him growing up chasing ghosts. Ethan's voice cracked. You think I'm a ghost? I thought you were a memory, and memories don't come back with rifles and stitched-up horses. They stood in silence. Outside, the wind rattled the old shutters. Dust swirled like smoke beneath the door. Lillian turned away. I never wanted this. I did, Ethan said. For years. Every time I saw a child his age, every time I passed a churchyard. She wiped her cheek. What happens now? Ethan looked toward the boy. I do not know. But deep down, something in him had already shifted. The roots of what he lost were still alive, buried, hidden, but never severed. The desert grew colder as the sun dipped low, but the wind carried more than chill. It brought signs, unwelcome ones. Ethan crouched near a patch of disturbed earth just beyond the outpost's fence. Hoof prints. Not from his horse. They were fresher, smaller, likely from riders scouting on light mustangs. He followed the tracks a few paces before crouching again and brushing dust from a broken twig. They were watching. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing. Then he turned back toward the outpost, where Jesse's laughter carried faintly through the dry wind. That night, while Lillian prepared beans and flatbread over the coals, Ethan walked with Jesse around the perimeter. See this, he said, kneeling beside a tall patch of yucca. That's a trip line. If someone walks through here, the cans rattle loud enough to wake the dead. Jesse tilted his head, eyes wide. Like ghost alarms? Ethan smirked. Exactly. They moved on. Jesse held a small lantern, watching closely as Ethan tied knots, buried pressure plates, reset a rusted bear trap. Why do you do all this? Jesse asked. Ethan glanced at him. Because some men don't care who they hurt. They come with guns and don't stop to ask who's inside. Jesse grew quiet. Ethan stood, brushed his hands on his trousers, then reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He knelt again and unwrapped it, revealing a small, carved wooden knife. Its hilt was smooth, the blade dull and round, clearly not meant to kill, but shaped with care. Jesse's eyes lit up. Is that for me? Ethan nodded. My pa gave me one just like it when I was your age. He handed it over. Jesse held it reverently, then looked up. What do I do with it? You carry it, Ethan said, and if trouble comes, you keep your mama behind you. You stand your ground, and you remember you're braver than any outlaw. Jesse's brows furrowed with solemn pride. I will. From the kitchen doorway, Lillian watched. Her hands had gone still over the pan. The flickering firelight danced across her face as she watched the two figures, one tall, one small, kneeling in the dusk like father and son. Later that night, Jesse lay curled beneath a wool blanket. His carved knife rested under his pillow. Ethan sat nearby, leaning against the wall, rifle within reach. Lillian approached, knelt beside her sleeping son, and pulled the blanket higher over his shoulders. He likes you, she said softly. He's easy to like. She studied Ethan's face for a long moment. You've changed. Ethan shrugged. 7 years will do that. She hesitated, then added, in the good ways. He said nothing. She stood to go, but as she turned, she paused. You're teaching him things I never could, she whispered. Things he needs to know. Their eyes met briefly, then she disappeared into the darkened corner of the room. Ethan looked down at the sleeping boy. Jesse's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, one hand curled around the handle of the wooden knife. Ethan leaned in close, brushed the boy's hair from his face, and whispered, "If you're mine, if you're my blood, I swear I'll never walk away again." Jesse stirred slightly, murmured something. Ethan leaned closer. In a sleepy whisper, Jesse said, "I wish you were my papa." Ethan closed his eyes. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, a man sat in silence, beside a boy who didn't know the truth and a promise that had already taken root in his chest. The desert had gone still, the kind of stillness that knew violence was coming. It was past midnight. A thin moon cast its pale eye over the ridge, silvering the rocks and the dry grass around the outpost. Inside, all was quiet. Ethan sat with his rifle across his lap, staring into the black. Then he heard it, the faint rattle of metal against metal, one of the tripwires. Ethan stood instantly. He moved to the window, rifle ready. Shadows moved in the distance. 6 figures. "Julian," he hissed. "Get Jessie. Hide in the cellar." She was already up, grabbing the boy and pulling him toward the trap door near the hearth. Ethan ran to the door and bolted it, just as a shot rang out and splintered the wood near his head. The Grangers had come. They came in fast, 2 at the front, 1 trying to scale the back wall, others spreading around the sides. Ethan fired once through the slats, hitting one square in the chest. Another tripped one of the traps and went down screaming, caught in the bare jaws. But they kept coming. Ethan reloaded, heart pounding. His shoulder burned with old tension, breath ragged from too many years on the run, but he moved with the grim speed of a man who had something left to protect. A window shattered behind him. He turned, fired. Another scream. Then a crash. The back door buckled. Wood splintered. Someone got inside. "Lillian," he called. No answer. He sprinted toward the cellar, too late. One of the raiders had burst in through the back and grabbed her by the arm, dragging her toward the door. "Let her go!" Ethan roared. He fired but missed. The man used Lillian as a shield. Ethan hesitated. Suddenly Jesse appeared, knife in hand, eyes wide with terror but burning with courage. "Let my mama go!" he cried. And before Ethan could stop him, Jesse ran forward, the wooden knife raised in both hands. The Granger men laughed cruelly, yanked Lillian back, and kicked Jesse in the chest. The boy fell, hard. Time stopped. Ethan saw red. He threw down the rifle and charged. The outlaw turned, raised his revolver, but Ethan was faster. He slammed into him full force, knocking the gun away. They crashed to the floor, grappling. The outlaw slashed with a blade, cutting deep into Ethan's shoulder. But Ethan did not stop. He punched, elbowed, grabbed the man's own knife, and drove it through his gut. The reader went still. Ethan staggered to his knees, blood soaking through his sleeve. Another shout. 2 more were coming through the front. Ethan stood swaying, eyes blazing. "I won't lose him again," he growled. Another gunshot ripped through the room. Ethan spun and fired back, hitting the man in the neck. The last Granger charged with a club. Ethan let him get close, then drove his shoulder into the man's gut, threw him against the wall, and finished it with a bullet between the eyes. Silence returned. Only the sound of Jesse crying broke the dark. Ethan turned, stumbled toward the boy, his vision blurred, his chest heaving. Jesse looked up at him, bloody lip, eyes round. "Papa," he whispered. Ethan fell to his knees. "Yeah," he breathed, "I'm here." Lillian crawled to them both, wrapping her arms around Jesse, then around Ethan, sobbing. "You're hurt," she cried. Ethan smiled faintly, blood running down his side. "Not as bad as I could be." He reached for Jesse's hand, held it tight. "You were brave," he whispered. "Braver than I ever was." Jesse leaned against him, small hand pressing to Ethan's chest. Outside, the wind shifted again. But inside, despite the blood, the broken door, the scattered shells, something sacred had taken root. Not in words, not yet, but in the way a man bled for a child, and the way that child, for the first time, called him Papa. The room smelled of smoke and blood. Outside, the desert wind howled through bullet-ridden walls. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. Ethan lay on the floor, one hand pressed weakly to the wound in his shoulder, his face pale beneath the blood and dust. His breaths came shallow, slow. Lillian knelt beside him, one hand cradling the back of his head, the other trying desperately to slow the bleeding. Her eyes were wild with fear, shining with tears that would not fall. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Stay awake, please." Ethan's gaze fluttered, then fixed softly on her face. He tried to smile, but it came out more like a tremble. "You never stopped being beautiful," he rasped. "Shut up," she choked. "Just breathe." From behind her, Jesse crawled forward. He pressed his small hand into Ethan's calloused fingers. "Is he going to die?" the boy asked. Lillian didn't answer. Ethan's fingers twitched around the boy's. He turned his head toward him. His voice was a breath, barely there. "Kid." Jesse leaned in. Ethan blinked slowly, fighting the fog creeping into his mind. Are you mine?" The question hung in the air, fragile and broken. Jesse tilted his head. "Mama never said." He turned to her. "Mama, am I his son?" Lillian's lips parted. The tears finally fell. She nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "you are." Jesse looked down at Ethan, confusion and awe in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. She reached for his cheek. "Because I was afraid. I was afraid of losing both of you. Again." Ethan exhaled, long and shaky, his body shuddering. Lillian took his hand, placed Jesse's smaller one inside it, and wrapped her fingers around them both. "I thought you were dead," she said, voice trembling, "and when I knew you weren't, I couldn't bear the thought of you hating me, for hiding him, for running." Ethan stared at the boy, his boy, and something old and heavy in his chest cracked open. He squeezed Jesse's hand, feebly, but with all the strength he had left. "You're the reason," he whispered. "The reason I've kept breathing, the reason I kept walking. I just didn't know it was you." Jesse swallowed hard. "You're my papa." Ethan closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his dirt-smeared cheek. "Yeah," he breathed. "I am." Lillian pressed her forehead to Ethan's. "You're not leaving us. Not again." "I'm not trying to," he said faintly. "But if I do, just know. I died with my son's hand in mine." "No," Lillian said fiercely, voice shaking. "You're not dying. You're going to live. For him. For us." Ethan opened his eyes, searching Jesse's face. "So much of me is in you," he whispered. "Even when I wasn't there." Jesse nodded. "I waited. I didn't know who I was waiting for, but I think it was you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, with truth, with the raw pulse of something once buried, now set free. Ethan's eyes drifted shut, but his hand never let go. The wind no longer sounded like ghosts. It whispered like memory now, rustling gently through the broken boards of the outpost that had become something more than shelter. It had become the start of something new. Ethan lay still beneath the patched wool blanket. His wound, though deep, had stopped bleeding days ago. Lillian had boiled every cloth, ground wild sage for poultices, and refused to sleep for more than an hour at a time. Each day she spoon-fed him broth and pressed cool rags to his forehead. And Jesse never left his side. The boy brought Ethan his canteen, brushed away flies, tucked the corners of his blanket without being asked. At night, when the lantern dimmed, he would crawl beside the cot, curl up against Ethan's good arm, and fall asleep there, his small body breathing steady against the chest of the man he now knew as Papa. The first time he'd said it, Ethan had been half-conscious. "Good night, Papa," Jesse had whispered. The words struck deeper than any bullet. Now, each time it was spoken, it stitched something back together in Ethan's soul. One morning, after the worst of the fever had passed, Ethan opened his eyes to find Lillian sitting beside him with a basin of water. Her face was tired, soft around the edges with worry. "How long was I out?" he murmured, voice gravel-thin. 4 days, she said. His eyes searched hers. "You stayed." "Of course I did." A silence bloomed between them, not sharp, but heavy with history. "Is he okay?" Ethan asked. Lillian nodded. "Better than you, though he insists on sharpening that little wooden knife." Ethan chuckled, winced. "My kind of boy." Later that day, Jesse came running in from outside, breathless and holding a small wildflower. He climbed up onto the cot and placed it beside Ethan's hand. "For you, Papa," he said. Ethan took it, heart trembling beneath his ribs. "Thank you, son." The word son tasted strange, sacred, as if he were learning a new language. That night, as the stars bloomed across the sky, Ethan sat up for the first time on the edge of the cot, his arm in a sling. Lillian helped him ease into a chair near the fire. Jesse leaned against her, half asleep. Ethan looked at them. Really looked. At the life he thought he'd lost. At the woman who once ran, and the boy who didn't know he had been waited for his whole life. "I need to say something." Ethan said. Lillian turned to him, eyes wary but open. "I ain't asking to pick up where we left off. I know the past's too heavy for that." She nodded. "But I want to be here. Not as your husband. Not yet. Maybe never." Lillian's breath caught. "I want to be his father," Ethan continued. "Proper. Teach him to ride, to fish, to fight if he has to. Tell him who he comes from, not just what happened to us." He paused. "And I want to be whatever you'll let me be, even if it's just a roof and a promise." Lillian stood slowly, walked to him, and took his hand. Her fingers were calloused, steady. "You already are," she said. "You've been his father since the night you gave him that knife." She knelt beside him. "And you've been mine, long before fire took our home." Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. She smiled. A real one. "We're a family, Ethan Kane, even if it took us 7 years and a bullet to figure it out." He looked down at her hand in his. "Then let's not waste another day." From across the room, Jesse stirred in his sleep. "Papa," he mumbled. Ethan squeezed Lillian's hand. "I'm here, son." And for the first time in 7 years, the man who used to live with his boots at the door had nowhere else to go, because he had finally come home. 1 month later, the desert was no less wild, but the wind no longer howled with threat. It hummed with new beginnings. By the bend of a narrow stream where willows bent low to drink, a cabin stood. New wood patched its walls. Smoke drifted from the stone chimney. The sound of a hammer echoed each morning, followed by the laughter of a child and the gentle rhythm of a woman planting along the porch rail. Ethan Kane stood at the edge of the field, shirt rolled at the sleeves, hat shading his eyes. He watched as Jesse rode in a slow circle on a young dun mare, his little hands gripping the reins with shaky confidence. "You're holding too tight," Ethan called. Jesse pouted. "She keeps turning left." "She's testing you," Ethan grinned. "Make her respect the right rein." Lillian stood nearby, sleeves rolled up, a woven basket filled with sprigs of wild lavender in her arms. "You sure he's ready for a horse of his own?" she asked, amused. "He's 6, Ethan replied, "and stubborn. He'll learn faster than I did." Lillian smiled, brushed dust off her skirt, and bent to tuck a flower behind the porch rail. The cabin's steps were lined with small pots, wildflowers, herbs, and even one pot of bluebonnets she swore she could coax to bloom. Inside the house, the rifle hung clean on the wall. Beside it, above the fireplace, was the wooden knife Ethan had given Jessie, now mounted with care, a symbol of the night they nearly lost everything and found more than they knew they'd ever had. That evening the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky with fire and gold. Jessie snored softly on the porch bench, a blanket around his shoulders. Ethan stepped inside, opened the lockbox beneath his bed, and pulled out his last weapon, the Colt .45 that had followed him through 7 years of vengeance. He held it for a moment, weighing its weight in his palm. Then, slowly, deliberately, he placed it inside the box. Closed the lid. Turned the key. He carried the box outside. Lillian looked up from where she was sweeping the porch. Her eyes followed him as he walked to the back of the cabin, dug a shallow hole beneath the roots of the willow, and lowered the box inside. He covered it with dirt, patted it flat. She said nothing, but her hands stopped moving. Ethan returned to the porch. He scooped Jessie up in his arms, the boy murmuring sleepily. He sat down in the rocking chair and settled the boy in his lap, pulling the blanket higher. Lillian stood behind him, wrapped her arms around his shoulders, resting her chin gently on his good one. Ethan looked down at the boy, then out across the clearing where the stars began blinking awake. "This is home," he said softly. Then, louder so Jessie could hear, he whispered near the boy's ear, "This is home, son, and your papa's not going anywhere." Jessie stirred, nestled closer into his chest. Ethan closed his eyes. The desert was still wild, the past still scarred. But here, in a cabin stitched from sweat and forgiveness, beside a woman he had lost and a child he had found, Ethan Kane was no longer a man chasing ghosts. He had come home, not with vengeance, but with the courage to love again. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey through the dust and heartache of the American frontier. If your heart stirred when a father shielded his son with his own body, when a mother forgave the past to protect the future, and when love found its way home through fire and blood, then you're in the right place. For more powerful stories of forbidden love, redemption, and courage under the Wild West skies, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Hit that bell so you never miss a tale where bullets miss but hearts never do. Because out here, love rides with the brave, and sometimes coming home is the bravest thing of all.